There comes a moment, and maybe this is that moment for you, when your soul quietly admits, I don't feel God anymore. Not in the songs, not in the scriptures, not even in the silence. It's like standing in a familiar room that's suddenly gone cold. The lights are still on, but the warmth is gone. You keep showing up, you keep praying, you keep whispering his name into the night. But it feels like nothing is listening. You try to remember the last time you felt him, not just believed in him, but felt him, that sacred closeness, that breath of comfort, that unmistakable peace that once wrapped around your soul like a blanket in winter. But now, all you feel is tired. And the worst part, you don't even know when it started. It's not that you stopped believing, no. It's deeper than doubt. It's a quiet ache, a subtle emptiness, like the echo of something that used to be there. And no one around you really sees it. You still smile, still serve, still nod when someone says, God is good. And he is. But something inside you feels numb. And maybe you've blamed yourself. Maybe you thought, it's my fault. I drifted. I got lazy. I failed. But what if I told you, this silence you're feeling, this distance, this numbness doesn't mean he left? What if it means something sacred is happening that your emotions just haven't caught up with yet? I know how it feels to pray with no tears left, to listen and hear nothing, to search the scriptures and feel like they're written in another language, to wonder quietly if maybe he moved on to someone holier, someone more faithful, someone who deserves him more. But listen, if this speaks to your heart, stay. You're not alone. And this moment might just be the doorway into something deeper than you've ever known before. Let's walk through it together. You wake up in the morning and everything looks normal. The coffee brews, the light pours through the same window, but something in you is off. You go through the motions, brushing your teeth, getting dressed, maybe even reading a devotional, but none of it lands. It's like someone pressed mute on your spirit, and you're just miming your faith. You miss the days when your prayers felt alive, when worship songs used to break you wide open, when the presence of God felt like a weight pressing gently on your chest, a holy kind of gravity. Now you feel hollow, not rebellious, not faithless, just disconnected. And you try to talk about it maybe, but people say things like, just pray more, or you need to trust God, or maybe there's sin in your life. And those words, they don't help, they hurt. Because you've been praying, you've been trusting, you've been confessing things you didn't even know you felt guilty for. Still, the silence remains. You start wondering if you're broken, if maybe there's something wrong with your heart, something that disqualified you from that intimacy you used to feel. And it becomes easier to hide it, to pretend. You smile at church. You raise your hands because that's what you're supposed to do. You quote verses that used to comfort you, even if now they feel empty. And it feels like you're betraying your own soul just to keep up the illusion. But can I say something to you now? Something I wish someone had told me. This numbness does not make you less faithful. This silence does not mean you've failed. This ache is not a sign of his absence. You are still loved. You are still seen. And even here, in this dry, cracked, silent place, God is still closer than you think. I know you've tried. You've fasted. You've cried. You've asked God to just show up in a way you could feel again. And nothing. But he hasn't left you, he's not punishing you, and you are not crazy. This is part of the journey, the dark night of the soul. It's not where your faith ends, it's where something deeper begins. So, if you're still listening, stay. You're not lost. You're just walking through the valley with your eyes still adjusting to the dark. There's a part of you that still whispers, keep going. But there's another part, louder, heavier, that says, what's the point? You've asked God the questions you were told never to ask. Are you even real? Do you still hear me? Why does it feel like you don't care? And then the guilt rushes in. Because how can someone who loves God question him? How can you call yourself a believer when your faith feels like it's unraveling thread by thread? But here's the secret no one talks about enough. Real faith doesn't always sound like confidence. Sometimes real faith is the cry in the night, the whisper through clenched teeth, the breath that says, "I'll stay," even when your heart wants to run. You don't need to pretend you're okay. God isn't offended by your honesty. He's not surprised by your weakness. He's not disgusted by your doubts. He's seen you in the shower, collapsing under the weight. He's heard the silence in your prayers, the pauses where words used to live. He knows about the anger you've buried, the questions you hide even from yourself. And he still calls you his. But it's exhausting, isn't it? To live in this space between knowing he's good and not feeling it. Between holding on and slowly letting go. Between hope and heartbreak. And sometimes you wish he'd just shout, that he'd split the sky, that he'd write on the wall like he did for Daniel, that he'd interrupt your pain with something undeniable. But instead, silence. And the silence becomes louder than any sermon you've ever heard. This is the part where many walk away, where they assume God has walked away first. But I need you to hear this. He hasn't. Your confusion is not a wall, it's a wilderness. And in the wilderness, the voice of God doesn't thunder, it whispers. He's doing something in this place, something that doesn't depend on your emotions, something sacred, something slow. So if you've been beating yourself up for not feeling on fire, stop. God is not looking for fireworks. He's looking for faithfulness in the quiet. And if you're still here, still showing up, that's not failure. That's faith. Then out of nowhere, something small happens. Not a miracle, not a thunderclap, but a moment. You're driving and a song plays that you haven't heard in years, and suddenly your chest aches with something familiar. You're cleaning the kitchen, lost in thought, and a verse floats to the surface like a whisper from somewhere deeper than memory. You see a child laughing. You hear the wind moving through the trees. You sit in the stillness, and for one brief second, you remember. Not just who God is, but who you were when you felt closest to him. It's not dramatic, it's not even clear, but something soft lands in your soul. Something like hope, something like him. And in that flicker, that breath of warmth in the cold, you realize he's still here. He never stopped being here. He was in the tears you couldn't cry. He was in the strength you didn't know you had. He was in the moments when you almost gave up, but didn't. And suddenly you remember the times he did answer, the prayers you forgot you prayed, the doors that opened, the wounds that healed, the days you thought would break you, but somehow they didn't. You remember the way he held you when no one else did. The way his word used to feel alive in your chest. The way your spirit used to know, without proof, that you were never alone. And maybe, just maybe, that knowing isn't gone. Maybe it's just buried, quiet, waiting. Because even seeds in the dirt don't feel the sun until it's time. That flicker you felt, that wasn't just nostalgia. That was God calling you back, not to who you used to be, but to something deeper, wiser, truer. You don't have to pretend anymore. You just have to respond, even if all you can say is, God, if you're still there, I'm still here. And that one sentence is enough to start again. Something begins to shift, not outside, but inside, not fast, but real. There's no trumpet sound, no angelic chorus, just breath, just you, breathing again. You don't feel on fire. You're not suddenly overwhelmed by joy, but there's a softness, a space, like your soul is exhaling after holding its breath for too long. And it's in that breath that you realize God didn't wait for you to be strong again. He met you in the weakness. He didn't need you to shout praise from a mountaintop. He sat with you in the valley. He's not intimidated by your brokenness. He's not counting how many days you've been numb. He's not grading your devotion. He's just here, present, patient, still writing your story while you sit in silence. That's the kind of love we talk about, but rarely trust. A love that doesn't flinch at your shadows. A love that rebuilds quietly from the inside out. A love that sees every cracked piece of you and calls it holy ground. And slowly you start to open again. Not wide, not fast, but you open. You whisper prayers without expecting an answer, and yet they don't feel empty anymore. You read a verse, and it doesn't change your life, but it stays with you. You walk outside and feel the sun, and it doesn't fix the pain, but it touches something deeper than pain. That's how healing begins, not with lightning, but with light. It seeps in, it settles, it stays. And you begin to rebuild your faith, not on emotion, not on clarity, but on something far more sacred: presence. Even when you can't feel him, even when nothing makes sense, even when you're still tired, you choose to believe he's still here, and that belief, quiet as it is, becomes the foundation. And maybe that's the kind of faith that matters most. Not the loud faith, not the public faith, but the quiet kind that gets up, breathes, and says, "God, I'm still walking, even if I can't see where this is going." And that's enough. Then one day, not marked on any calendar, not wrapped in fanfare, it hits you. Not like a revelation, more like a quiet unfolding, a realization that doesn't shout, but settles in your soul, like truth always does. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a classroom, a sacred space where God was not absent, but speaking in a language your heart didn't yet understand. Because he wasn't just trying to comfort you, he was trying to change you, not into someone louder, not into someone more spiritual, but into someone anchored. And now you see it, not everything, but more than before. You see how he held you together when your prayers fell apart. You see how he planted strength in the silence, how he stripped away the illusions of performance and invited you into something deeper than feeling: trust. It's not glamorous, it doesn't get applauded, but it's the kind of faith that lasts. And you realize it wasn't that you lost God, it's that you were being invited to know him beyond the noise, beyond the goosebumps, beyond the moments where everything feels right. You were being drawn into a relationship that wasn't built on emotional highs, but on divine depth. And that's what no one told you. Sometimes when God feels far, he's actually pulling you closer, not to test you, but to mature you. Because love that depends on feelings will crumble in chaos, but love that's been tested by silence becomes unshakable. You're not weak because you questioned. You're wise because you stayed. You're not broken because you felt numb. You're brave because you kept breathing in the dark. And now you know him in a way that no mountaintop ever taught you. You found him in the silence. You heard him in the stillness. You saw him in your own survival. And now you carry that truth, not just as comfort, but as fire. Because he didn't just get you through the silence, he transformed you inside it. So here you are, not the same, not fixed, but different. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not a sudden sunrise, but the slow return of light after the longest night of your life. You may still have questions, still feel tired, still wonder why it had to be this way. But now you know how to walk even when it's dark. Now you know that God doesn't disappear when your emotions do. Now you understand that silence isn't proof of absence. It's an invitation to go deeper. And tonight, when you lay your head down and whisper nothing, just a breath, he'll hear it. He always did. So pray like this, even if the words feel empty. God, I don't feel you, but I still want you. Meet me in the quiet, shape me in the silence, and stay even when I can't feel you staying. That prayer, it's enough. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. You are not less. You are being refined, gently, slowly, by a God who still writes beauty from ashes and speaks louder in the stillness than you ever thought possible. And one day, someone else will sit in this silence, and you'll know how to tell them, don't give up, he's closer than you think. You'll carry peace, not the loud kind, but the kind that stays when nothing else does. So if this helped you breathe again, come back tomorrow. We walk together here.